People have been asking for this one for a while now. God, give me the strength. This is not going to be a three-parter. I don't know how long this is going to take. We're covering the fall of the Romanov family. We're going to talk about their deaths at the hands of the Bolsheviks, what caused the Russian Revolution, and of course we're going to talk about Anastasia. The real Anastasia, not the movie, although Dmitri could get it. Woohoo! And we're also going to talk about one of the most colorful characters in the history of all histories, in my opinion, Grigory Mother-Flippin' Rasputin. And before we get started on the series itself, let's talk about some sources. Just some recommendations, things I've listened to. Of course, some of this is coming just directly from the internet, but also I highly, highly, highly recommend Last Podcast on the Left's like five-part series on Rasputin. Now, granted, that podcast is not for everybody because they're very dark humor. And Ask a Mortician on YouTube. We're talking the Romanovs on History Talk. In the history of the Romanovs, I mean, this story only is as popular as it is, I think, because of how it ended. When you compare Tsar Nicholas to, the rest of the family, he's kind of boring and inept, especially when you have Catherine the Great in your family line. But the story is completely tragic. Nicholas was married to Alex of Hesse, or Hesse. She is the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. The two met at a wedding of her, I think, cousin or brother, and they fell in love. That's one of the saddest things about this story is that these two were actually in love with one another. Like, they shared a bedroom. I know that may seem small potatoes, but that was not normal for royal families. Her Russian wasn't that great, so they mostly actually spoke to each other in their common language of English. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy for him so that they could be married. But despite their happiness, they were a doomed pair. Some of it had to do with politics, and some of it had to do with genetics. You'll see what I'm talking about here shortly. After Catherine the Great died, her son made it so that women would never rule Russia again. This posed a problem because these two kept having girls. I hate it when men... So they were desperate to have a son. By all accounts, though, Nicholas loved his daughters. They just knew that they needed a male heir. She was so desperate to have a son that she started going to mystics and psychics, trying to figure out what she needed to do to have a son. Little did she know that her having the son would begin the downfall of this entire family. In 1904, to his parents' joy, they finally had Alexei. But the joy was short-lived. Alexei had hemophilia. And we all know that Alex herself was the carrier, because it was very predominant in Victoria's family. But she had friends who put her in touch with someone they told her could help. There has never been a person who has clawed their way to the top quite like Rasputin did. And while I would love to get into all the stuff he was into, we could just basically call him a mystic. Because nobody in the Russian Orthodox Church liked this guy at all. He was notoriously promiscuous and was kind of a con man. And yet somehow, some way, he managed to take actually pretty good care of Alexei. Hemophilia, and remember, I'm not a licensed medical professional, basically means that your blood will not clot if you get cut. So a bruise or a fall that a normal child could just walk away from could potentially be deadly for Alexei, who was adorable, by the way, so cute. And somehow this man was able to calm the child down and calm his mother down, and it seemed to work. Meanwhile, the political atmosphere of Russia is shifting. People are starting to resent the Tsar, and there's a lot of reasons that I won't be able to get into. And their enemies have noticed this weird guy. Being a Russian back in the day was pretty hard. In addition to poor living conditions, around this time, Russia gets involved in World War I, and he's leading the troops. And he's not good at it. And because Alex was a German, there were a lot of rumors that she was a spy on the inside there. The situation was not helped by the fact that Alex looked to this guy as an advisor and urged Nicholas to do the same. Guys, he's crazy. Don't do it. So that was not good. And this whole thing was making her less and less liked by the Russian people who were rioting because, much like the French, if they don't get food, they're going to be very unhappy, and I completely understand that. Hunger has caused a lot of things in world history. So rumors start going around that Alex and Razzie are just kind of hooking up, which, no, they weren't. She was trying to keep the hemophilia a secret, but so she wasn't telling anybody what Rasputin was actually doing, which was taking care of their son. Tensions are high, and the rest of the Romanov family has realized that this guy's causing a lot of problems, mainly because The media at the time had picked up on him, and they were using him as an excuse to overthrow, because nobody liked Rasputin except for Alex. So first they try to get rid of him by, blackmailing him, i.e. taking photos of him with several nude women. Rasputin was smart, though, and he immediately took the photos, the damning photos, to Nicholas, fell on his knees, and was like, I have made a terrible mistake, please forgive me. So he beat, the negative press by just self-confessing. And they decided to keep him. By 1916, though, some of the other Romanovs decided to take matters into their own hands. And this is nuts. This is Felix Yusupov. He's married to Tsar Nicholas's niece, and he decides he's going to be the one to take out Rasputin. I know the story of someone being killed shouldn't be funny, but for some reason, this one's hilarious. I'm going to go to hell. So Felix decided he was going to help out the Romanovs, whether they wanted him to or not. So he invites Rasputin to a party where he's made one of his favorite snacks that he has poisoned. So he hands them to Rasputin, who eats them, and it doesn't kill him. And they're all sitting around like, wait a minute, what? They also poisoned the wine. That didn't work. So finally they started shooting him, and that still didn't work. Like, he'd been shot so many times and he just got up and stood there like nothing had happened. Good Lord. After a final gunshot wound to the temple, it appeared that Rasputin was finally gone. He was thrown in a river, and then they found water in his lungs, indicating that the fatal shot to the head didn't actually kill him, he drowned. Alexander was heartbroken, and Felix ended up getting exiled for this. In 1917, a bunch of industrial workers went on strike, and then all of a sudden people were rioting in the streets. By that spring, an anti-Tsar Bolshevik named Vladimir Lenin had taken over the situation. Nicholas saw there was no coming back from this, so he abdicated his throne. But that wasn't what the Bolsheviks wanted. And so the Bolsheviks placed the Romanovs under house arrest. Instead of being able to stay in their palace, they were moved to a house in Ekaterinburg. I think I said that right. They were moved to the aptly named House of Special Purpose. And I'm so sorry to tell you that this story is just heartbreaking. I can always understand why people revolt when the government is treating them badly, but I just cannot understand how you're going to kill an entire family, especially the ones that can't inherit the throne. The Romanovs were allowed to keep some servants in this house, and they were allowed to bring their dog with them. Life kind of went on normally, besides the fact that they were not allowed to leave. They were allowed to have dinner, hang out, but they were also plotting an escape. Knowing that they could bribe people with some of their expensive jewelry, they began sewing pieces of jewelry into their corsets and undergarments. The women, obviously. That's going to turn out to be a very important part of this story, so keep that in mind. The people who were guarding them were waiting on orders and commands from Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was hesitant to execute the family, but he also didn't want them around anymore. Meanwhile, an army of people loyal to the Tsar are trying to get to the house, and they're moving very quickly. So Lenin knows that there's a chance that they could be freed if this army makes it to the house. He doesn't want to let that happen. This is Yakov, Lord help me, Yurovsky. No Russian. It's worse than my French accent. He was charged with kind of babysitting the Romanovs. In a weird way, he and Nicholas actually kind of respected each other. They would hang out and smoke cigarettes, which I thought was like, okay. But he was also waiting on the word from Lenin on what to do with the family. As the White Army got closer to the House of Special Purpose, they received instructions from Lenin. Kill all of them. In the overnight hours of July 16th into 17th, 1918, the family is taken to a basement where they are told they're being transferred to a vehicle. This is going to get not fun, guys, sorry. Yakov enters the room and tells them they have been sentenced to death. That's when all hell breaks loose. The guards began firing, killing Nicholas first, then Alex, then Alexei. And this is the hard part. Because the girls had sewn in the jewelry into their corsets, the bullets began ricocheting, and they had to use a bayonet to finish them off. Vladimir Lenin made it really well known that he did not want these bodies to be found, because he knew if people knew that they had killed the entire family, including the children, that there would be a lot of backlash. You think? Their bodies were stripped. They were thrown into 2 shallow graves. This is starting to sound like a true crime podcast, but anyway. And then they set them on fire. It will take years before their bodies were ever found. But rumors began circulating that one of the Romanovs escaped. It wasn't true, but now we have imposters coming forward. The rumors go that somebody allowed young Anastasia to escape out of kindness. Many years later, this woman, Anna Anderson, would claim to be Anastasia. Many people believe she was because she shared a similar deformity on her foot that Anastasia had. Some family members were even convinced, but years later, DNA proved that she was not Anastasia. After the fall of the USSR, geologists began doing some research to look for the graves of the Romanovs. After talking to a lot of people who were part of the Bolsheviks, he managed to find some of the bodies, but not all, which also kind of fueled the theory about Anastasia being alive, because they found a child, but they thought it might be Maria. Almost 30 years later, another researcher found the other 2 bodies of Alexei and what is either Maria or Anastasia. They're not sure. The Russian Orthodox Church made this family saints. Strangely, though, only some of them were buried. The remains of Maria and Alexei actually remain in an institute where they were studied. I don't know what the exact reason was for not turning those over to the church, but that's sad. You can pay your respects today at Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg.